Hey, how's it going, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. While civilization has been collapsing down around our ears, the Supreme Court did its part by trampling on our First Amendment rights. When Governor Gavin Newsom issued his reopening plan for California, Stage 2, which started on May 8th, stipulated that restaurants could begin allowing customers to dine in, provided that the restaurants followed strict safety protocols and that the counties in which they were located continued to see a decline in coronavirus infections. Churches, on the other hand, were told that they were still only going to be allowed a 25% capacity with a 100-person cap-off. They weren't going to be allowed to actually fully open for in-person services until Stage 3, which Newsom said was months, not weeks away. The South Bay United Pentecostal Church in Chula Vista went to court over this, making the commonsensical observation that if restaurants were allowed to reopen, then churches should be allowed to as well. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said no, prompting South Bay United Pentecostal to file a brief with the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, for its part, issued a 5-4 ruling, which actually upheld the Ninth Circuit's ruling. Chief Justice John Roberts siding with SCOTUS's progressive justices in saying that California's restrictions on churches were consistent with the First Amendment. This even though Justice Brett Kavanaugh pointed out commonsensically that you can't expect people to be on their best behavior when they go out to dinner on a Saturday night, and then expect them to be on their worst behavior when they go to church Sunday morning. This disregard for religion is actually becoming the norm here in the United States. If you were watching during the pandemic, you probably saw how our fearless news hawks wove a storyline in which suddenly, magically, religion became the main villain. In March, for instance, Catherine Stewart wrote an op-ed for the New York Times entitled, "The Religious Right's Hostility to Science is Crippling Our Coronavirus Response," which honestly pretty much spells out the entire point of her piece right there. By asserting that privatization and the desire for small government were both life-threatening and anti-government, and then connecting those to Christian nationalism, Christian nationalist leaders, and religiously conservative Republicans, Stewart was able to draw a line between the U.S.'s weak response to the coronavirus pandemic and religion and religious people. Gary Abernathy did pretty much the same thing over at the Washington Post in his piece, "What's Really Behind Republicans Wanting a Swift Reopening?" Evangelicals. Abernathy wrote, quote, "As far as many evangelicals are concerned, life passes quickly, suffering is temporary, and worrying solves nothing. That's not a view that comports well with long stretches of earthly time spent waiting out business closures or stay-at-home orders. It should be no surprise that a person's deepest beliefs about the world influence how they measure the risks they're willing to take." Translation: evangelical, conservative, MAGA hat-wearing voters don't care if you live or die, because they're going to heaven and you are going to hell. Praise Jesus! And it's getting worse out there, gang. New York City is still officially under quarantine rules, but you can totally break those rules if you want to engage in a riot. The Lord Mayor of the city himself says so. From Catholic News Agency, quote, "New York Mayor Bill de Blasio said Tuesday that ongoing protests in the city merit exceptions to coronavirus regulations, while religious services do not. When you see an entire nation simultaneously grappling with an extraordinary crisis seated in 400 years of American racism, I'm sorry, that is not the same question as the understandably aggrieved store owner or the devout religious person who wants to go back to services." So if I've got this right, you can't go to church to worship God, but you can totally go out to plunder and burn your neighbor's store. Good to know, Mr. Mayor. And the best part is that this trend is actually going international. Back in March, the UN's rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, Ahmad Shaheed, published a report in which he said that governments not only have the right, but the obligation to invade churches and religions and force them to change their doctrines in order to make them more inclusive. Shaheed said, quote, While religious organizations are entitled to autonomy in the administration of their affairs, such deference should be extended within a holistic conception of rights grounded in the universality, indivisibility, interdependence, and inalienability of all human rights. States have an obligation to guarantee to everyone, including women, girls, and LGBT+ people, an equal right to freedom of religion or belief, including by creating an enabling environment where pluralist and progressive self-understandings can manifest. This is bogus. Any look at history will show you that orthodox religions are not necessarily opposed to science. Take a look at some of the greatest scientists of memory, people like Louis Pasteur and Gregory Mendel, both of whom were deeply religious people. And any honest look at religious systems will show that most of them actually don't disregard people's conditions here on earth, but actually command their followers to help the poor, to help the downtrodden in the name of charity. So the $64 question is, why is this happening? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Religion is a rival sense of power to ideology. Power is a really dirty word today. When we say it, we get in our heads an image of a Machiavellian figure, probably a politician or a lawyer, maybe a studio executive who just wants domination over others and to control all life. Anyone who's honest enough to actually say that he is seeking power, we will immediately paint a big old red flag over him. And if you've managed to escape cynicism, then you're probably especially leery about associating religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, with power, since power seems to be the exact opposite of what those religions preach. Christianity, for example, the whole heart and core of it is love. John the Evangelist out and out says that God is love. That's understandable, but it's misguided. It's easy to see why power has such a dirty connotation in our minds, especially when we look back over history and see all the times out of mind that it's been abused. But when you get right down to it, all power is the ability to do something or to act in a certain way. So for example, I can talk. Therefore, I have the power of speech. I can walk. Therefore, I have the power of movement, of mobility. I am a man, therefore I am a rational substance, and therefore I have the power of reason. Even love, the heart and soul of Christianity, one of the major religions of the world for the last 1500 years, is a power, since it gives us the ability to care for others. It gives us the ability to put the good of others before ourselves, and if necessary, it gives us the ability to lay down our lives for our friends. Now, we've heard those words so many times that we've actually lost sight of how radical that idea is. And it's radical because it goes contrary to the most basic instinct that we have as human beings, the instinct to survive. Our bodies are wired for survival. That's why we reproduce. That's why when we're in a real jam, backs up against the wall, no hope of escape, the torpedo is coming right towards us, our body pumps us full of adrenaline for fight or flight. But with love, with that power, we can actually override those primal instincts and sacrifice ourselves for someone else. And if you're still in doubt, recall Jesus' words in the Gospel of Mark, where he tells the disciples that if they have faith the size of a mustard seed, they could tell the mountain, go into the sea, and it would actually go and do it. That's actually quite a lot of power when you sit down and really think it out. Religion then is a power because it gives its followers the ability to act in certain ways by giving them teachings and examples that they can implement in their own lives. So for example, if you're a Christian, you have the power to forgive your enemies because you have the teachings and the example of Christ. If you're Muslim, you have the power to wage war against your own vices and darker impulses because you have the teachings and the example of Muhammad. If you're Buddhist, you have the power to kind of divert reincarnation, avoid the whole thing altogether, because you have the teachings and the example of the Buddha. Now, because religion does have this power to direct the behavior of others, it has power in another sense too. It has what sociologists call authority, which is defined as accepted power, power that people willingly submit to. The 19th century German philosopher and historian Max Weber actually defined 3 different types of authority. there was traditional authority. Authority that was accepted by people because it was customary. Like girls in India today still kneeling down to put on their father's shoes. Because that's just what girls in India who aren't married are expected to do. What they have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. There is charismatic authority, authority that flows from the personality of the leader himself. Think of Jesus, think of Genghis Khan, think of Napoleon, think of Gandhi. And there is legal rational authority, authority that flows from constitutions and laws that people willingly agree to obey and observe. And the neat thing about religion is that it can actually flow across different spheres of power and authority. For example, Christianity, its authority began as charismatic. It flowed from the personhood of Jesus Christ. But now, 2,000 years after his birth, death, and resurrection, its authority is traditional. A brilliant example of religion as power in action is actually given in John Maxwell's The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. He tells the story of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the Catholic nun who devoted her life to the poor, destitute, and downtrodden of India, and how in 1994 she was asked to give a speech at the National Prayer Breakfast, an event that was attended by President Clinton, VP Gore, the DC establishment, and a couple of thousand evangelicals, Orthodox Catholics, and Jews. Peggy Noonan, writing about the event later, said that at the end of her speech there was no one in that room whom Mother Teresa had not offended, because she refused to keep her speech to safe topics like God and love. She talked about parents hurt beyond belief because their own children had shoved them into nursing homes and then completely forgotten about them. She even said that the primary enemy against peace was abortion. Keep in mind, she said this while standing in the same room with the man who just 2 years prior had said that abortion needed to be kept safe and legal during his acceptance speech as the Democratic nominee for president. Maxwell says that Mother Teresa was able to get away with saying all this because she had power. She had the power to say what she did because of the faith and courage that her religion gave to her. And people listened to her. They didn't jeer and boo her off stage because she had authority. Authority which she earned from her work in India, which again was motivated by her religion. A religion which commanded her to feed the poor, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, and bury the dead. To put it in popular slang, people listened because Mother Teresa had authority which came from her not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. If we get right down to it, the real power of religion comes from the fact that it's not really part of the natural world at all. The physical sciences explain how the world works. Philosophy explains what the world and everything in it is, and based on that, how things should be treated and how things should work based on their natures. But religion goes a step further, and it says why things are the way they are, and therefore, why we're even here in the first place. This usually entails a divine force, again, something outside the natural order, which creates the world and everything in it, including us, a fall from grace, and the hope of salvation. The primary message of every religion is that what we see and feel and experience around us, that's not the end all to be all, okay? The story doesn't end with death. There's another plane of existence beyond that. While we're here on earth living our own lives, we also have to keep in mind and one eye on something called eternity. The doctrines and the dogmas that religions place on its followers are all there to get us in alignment with the divine so that we can be truly happy, we can actually flourish, and eternity will actually be a reward and not a punishment. Having said all of that, we can now see why religion is a rival center of power to the force that has pretty much taken over most of the Western world today. Ideology, something which we have talked about numerous times before here on the channel. Ideology was officially created in Napoleonic France by a philosopher named Stewart de Tracy, who believed that it was absolutely possible to discover a series of laws which, if followed to the letter, would allow man to live in absolute peace and harmony here on Earth. The catch was that religion and metaphysics had to be thrown completely out the window since, de Tracy argued, they were forces that were created and kept in place for the specific goal of controlling mankind. by priests and kings. This effectively makes ideology, as my man Russell Kirk said, an inverted religion. Instead of believing that salvation is only possible for us individually at the moment of our death, ideology teaches that salvation is collectively possible right here, right now on earth. All we have to do is comply. Ideology preaches that the Garden of Eden can be recreated right here, right now, where everything will be good, just, holy, and pure. And human nature, that thing which seems to be really good at ruining pretty much anything it touches, don't worry about it. This time, we've got it. To give just one example, look at the riots and the protests that are still taking place across the country. Look at people being told to kneel down to apologize for their white privilege. Look at people willingly giving up their careers to atone for their white racism. Look at people who are actually washing the feet of protesters as a sign of penitence. All of these actions are religious rituals which are designed to get people on board with the ideology and to keep them on board and in line through fear and guilt. Because ideology promises that if everyone just complies, poof, racism will disappear forever, and peace, joy, and harmony will finally rule at last. This is why ideology is the unrepentant enemy of religion. Turns out it's really hard to harness people and get them to work towards salvation here on earth if they believe that salvation is only possible on the other side of the grave. In addition to that, if people believe in God, or in any divinity, actually, come to think of it, then the leaders of an ideology are going to look pretty puny compared to him, and a lot of their charismatic authority is going to be eroded away. And charismatic authority is the only real authority that ideologues can count on and harness, since by its very nature, ideology wants to overturn tradition and old legal systems. The bad news for ideologues is that even if they implemented every single idea that they had, it wouldn't do any good in the long run. The line dividing good from evil runs through every human heart, as Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. The problem for us is that people will only be reminded of that historical, philosophical, theological fact by argument made by a movement which at its heart is influenced by a religious worldview. Because, to put everything on Front Street, gang, only a religious worldview is going to be able to defeat the inversion of religion. But as usual, what say you? Is ideology the enemy of religion, and can it only be defeated through essentially religious arguments? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. Before you go, if you could give the video a like and share it with your friends on social media, I'd be very much obliged. And if you like videos about the culture, politics, and religion from a unique POV, then subscribe to the channel and ring that bell for notifications. Thank you for watching, for giving me a little bit of your day. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel. I appreciate you all. And until next time, gang, remember to dare to read, think, speak, and write. And I will talk to you next time. Ciao.